My son left me alone at an international airport in Costa Rica, without my passport, without my wallet, without my phone. He had been planning it for months. He wanted me gone long enough to walk into a lawyer's office and finish what he had started. But when he pulled into my driveway 3 days later and tried his key in the lock, the door didn't open, and I was already standing on the other side of it. I said, through the wood, nice and calm, that I had something for him to read. That something was a 40-page legal filing with his name on every second page. Before I tell you the rest, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. My son and I had always been close, or so I believed. After his mother passed 6 years ago, the two of us fell into a rhythm. Sunday dinners, hockey games on the television. He and his wife moved into the basement suite of my place in Victoria 2 years back, said they needed to get ahead financially. I didn't ask too many questions. He was my son. I handed him the spare key and told him the Wi-Fi password and left it at that. The trip to Costa Rica was his idea. 2 weeks in Guanacaste. He said I deserved a holiday. Said I'd been cooped up since retirement and needed sun. His wife agreed with everything he said, the way she always did, a fraction of a second too quickly. I should have noticed that pattern earlier. I didn't. I booked my flights, packed my bag, and counted down the days like a man who still believed he understood his own family. The first week was fine. Beach walks in the morning, cold beer in the afternoon, dinners where my son seemed genuinely relaxed for the first time in years. I remember thinking the trip had been a good idea. I remember feeling grateful. The shift happened in the second week. Small things. He started making calls he'd step away to take. His wife stopped meeting my eyes at breakfast. Twice I caught them ending a conversation the moment I came near, the silence dropping like a curtain. The morning of our departure, something felt wrong before I'd even finished my coffee. The three of us sat at the hotel restaurant, bags packed and waiting by the door, and neither of them spoke much. My son kept checking his phone. His wife picked at her food and said nothing. At Daniel Oduya International in Liberia, we checked in together and cleared security. The gate for our Air Canada flight home to Vancouver sat at the far end of the terminal. My son stopped near the water fountain about 20 minutes before boarding and said they needed snacks for the flight. He pressed some Kurlans into my hand and pointed toward a small convenience shop near the opposite end of the concourse. Said he needed to make a work call. Said his wife had to use the restroom. Said I knew what everyone liked, so could I go. I took the money and didn't think anything of it. The shop was crowded. A tour group in matching yellow shirts blocked the entire chip aisle. I waited. I found peanut butter crackers for my son, the trail mix his wife always wanted, a bottle of water for myself. The line moved slowly. By the time I turned back toward the gate, I'd been gone maybe 15 minutes. The seats we had occupied were empty, not just unoccupied. Our section had absorbed new travelers who showed no sign anyone had ever been sitting there with a family. I set the snacks down and reached for my carry-on. My hand found the main compartment. I unzipped it. Once, twice, a third time. My shirt was there, my toiletries, nothing else. The inner sleeve where I kept my Canadian passport, empty. The front pocket where my wallet always sat, gone. My mobile phone, the charger I'd packed beside it, all of it. I went to the gate counter with my hands shaking. The woman behind the desk was kind and professional and confirmed what I already knew. The couple in seats 7 and 8 had boarded an earlier connecting flight to Calgary. Standby passengers, she said. They had been upgraded from the wait list. Their original boarding passes were for Vancouver. She looked at me for a moment after saying that. She understood something was wrong. I walked back to where we had been sitting and stood there with a bag of snacks I couldn't pay for and a heart going cold in my chest. He had given me enough money for drinks and food and nothing more. He had timed it. He had handed me off like luggage he no longer needed and walked away. The airport security officer I found was patient with me. She spoke enough English to take down the basic information and directed me to the Canadian consulate office across town. She gave me a case number. She said I was not the first person to come to her desk with a story like this. That was the saddest thing she could have told me. The consulate was a short building with a maple leaf above the door. The officer inside, a steady woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a lanyard, set down her pen, and listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. Was I injured? Was I safe? I told her I was fine, just stranded. She said that was enough to work with. It took 3 business days to process an emergency travel document. $52 had remained in my front pocket from the snack money, more than I thought, and it was enough to cover a basic hostel near the center of Liberia while I waited. The hostel owner, a retired school teacher named Marco, waived the second night's deposit when I explained my situation. He had a daughter in Toronto, he said. He could not imagine. I borrowed Marco's computer in the evenings. I tried calling my home number twice. No answer. I tried a third time the morning before my flight. Still nothing. What I did with the remaining hours in that hostel was think, not spiral. Think. I had run a small electrical contracting business in Victoria for 28 years before selling it. I knew how to hold the pieces of a problem out in front of me and look at them without letting fear rearrange them. So I did that. My son had been living rent-free in my basement suite for 2 years. 2 months before the trip, he had come upstairs one evening with his laptop open and said he needed me to update some paperwork. Said it was a precaution, standard stuff, the kind of thing responsible families take care of before traveling internationally. He scrolled through something on the screen and said it was a healthcare directive, a document that allowed him to act on my behalf if I became incapacitated. He told me where to sign. I signed. I never saw a printed copy. I assumed it was filed somewhere sensible. I was 64 years old and in good health, and the trip was 2 weeks away, and I trusted my son. Sitting on a hostel bunk in Costa Rica, I understood for the first time what I had probably signed. The emergency travel document came through on the 3rd morning. I paid back the consulate fund from the cash the officer had advanced me, and thanked her. She said she hoped the situation at home was manageable. Her tone suggested she doubted it would be. Air Canada had a seat on the afternoon flight to Vancouver. I used my credit card number, which I had memorized years ago from habit, and booked it over the phone from the hostel front desk. Marco drove me to the airport in his truck and would not let me thank him properly. He said his daughter had called the night before, and that had been thanks enough. I landed in Vancouver just past 9 in the evening, and took the first connector down to Victoria. The ferry terminal was quiet. I sat outside on the upper deck, even though it was September and cold, and watched the lights of the Gulf Islands pass in the dark. The city appeared eventually, strung out along the shore, ordinary and unchanged. My house was somewhere in those lights, my house that I had paid off in full 15 years ago. My house that I now suspected had a different name on the title. My neighbor on the left side, a retired librarian named Patricia, who had lived there for 17 years, was on her porch deadheading the last of her dahlias when I came up the front path at midnight. She set her clippers down and stared. She said she had been trying to reach me for days. I asked her what had happened. She told me, 3 days ago my son and his wife had loaded boxes into a rental van before sunrise. Not luggage. Boxes. The kind you pack your belongings into when you are moving everything out of a place that once belonged to someone else. She had tried to ask them what was going on, and my son had waved her off and said I had asked them to collect some things while I was away. He did not look her in the eye when he said it. He drove away before 7 in the morning. I asked if she still had the spare key I had given her for emergencies. She went inside and came back with it. The house smelled stale when I let myself in. Closed up, unaired, the particular deadness of rooms that have been occupied without care. I moved through it fast. The good dining room chairs were gone. My wife's silver tea service, the one her mother had brought from Newfoundland, gone from the cabinet where it had lived for 30 years. The sign print by Emily Carr that had hung in the hallway since before my son was born, gone. The shelf in my office where I kept my father's Hamilton Railway pocket watch, the one he had carried every working day of his life. The shelf was bare. On my desk, centered with a precision that told me it had been placed there deliberately, was a manila envelope. Inside it was a transfer of title document, registered with the BC Land Title Office, showing my home at its full civic address, transferred from my name to my son's, signed 4 weeks ago, witnessed, stamped with a notary's seal. My signature at the bottom reproduced perfectly, because it was mine. I had made it in this kitchen on a Tuesday evening while my son held his laptop open and told me I was updating my healthcare directive. My hands were very still. The anger wasn't hot. It had bypassed heat entirely and arrived already cold. I went next door and asked Patricia if I could use her landline. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with my bank's fraud line. Security questions confirmed. Account activity checked. No unusual withdrawals. No new authorized users added. No beneficiary changes. My son had taken what was in the house and what was on paper, but had not yet reached the money. Either he hadn't thought of it or hadn't had time. I thanked the representative and hung up. Patricia made tea and sat across from me at her kitchen table while I wrote down a list. Lawyer, locks, police, documentation. Everything in that order. The locksmith came first thing the next morning. New deadbolts on both exterior doors and the suite entrance. The man asked no questions. He charged $420. I paid without discussion and tested every lock twice after he left. Then I photographed everything. Every empty shelf, every gap in the cabinet, every bare wall where something had hung for decades. I photographed the title transfer from 15 different angles and the notary seal 3 times under different light. I found the name of the notary in the margin of the document, a woman working out of a Langford office, and noted it down. My lawyer was a woman named Catherine Adeyemi, who had handled the sale of my contracting business 3 years before and knew how I operated. Her office was on Fort Street downtown. I called at 8 in the morning. Her assistant began offering me dates the following week. I said my son had registered a fraudulent transfer of my property and I needed to speak to Catherine that day. There was a pause. Then a different voice came on. She said, "Tell me exactly what happened." I gave her the short version. She asked 4 questions in rapid succession. Was the document notarized? Was my signature genuine? Did I understand what I was signing? Had I received a copy? She said, "Come in at 10. I arrived with the title transfer, the emergency travel document, the photographs, and 6 pages of handwritten notes I had made the night before. Catherine read through everything without speaking. She made marks in the margins with a green pen. When she looked up, she set the pen down. She told me the transfer appeared to have been properly executed under BC land law. The land title office would have processed it in good faith. The notary's stamp was legitimate on its face. She said, however, that word carried the whole conversation. She said, "If we can demonstrate that you were deceived about the document's nature, that you were told it was a healthcare directive when it was in fact a title transfer, we have a strong case for fraudulent misrepresentation. We apply to the BC Supreme Court to have the transfer set aside. We move for an emergency injunction to prevent any sale or encumbrance of the property while litigation is pending." She asked about the notary. I showed her the name. She recognized it, said she would contact that office directly. She told me what this would cost. Retainer of $6,000 that morning. If it went to full trial, she estimated between $35,000 and $60,000, possibly more depending on how hard my son chose to fight. I wrote the check. The RCMP detachment on Caledonia took my statement that afternoon. The officer was thorough and careful. He confirmed the passport, phone, and wallet constituted theft regardless of the family relationship. He noted the items removed from the house as additional counts. He said property disputes under civil law were for the courts, but the theft in Costa Rica and the removal of personal property from the residence were criminal matters he could pursue. He gave me a file number and said someone would follow up. What I did not expect was what Catherine told me 2 days later about the notary. The woman had agreed to speak with Catherine's paralegal over the phone. She had certified a document signing that took place in a food court at Masonville Place in London, Ontario, not at her office in Langford. She had been contacted by my son weeks before the vacation. He told her I had limited mobility and could not travel to an office. She met us at a table between a Tim Hortons and a sushi counter. I remembered that day. My son had said he was taking me for lunch and needed to swing by briefly to get some documents sorted. I had sat across from a woman with a stamp and a notepad while he set his laptop in front of me and talked me through 3 signatures. He told me the documents were a healthcare directive, a power of attorney limited to medical decisions, and an updated emergency contact form. He scrolled through each one at speed. I signed. The woman stamped and initialed. She charged $250 cash. Standard notary fees in BC for a real estate transfer are $25 to $40. She knew what she had participated in. She said she had felt uncomfortable, but needed the work. She agreed to provide a written statement. My son retained a property litigation lawyer 2 days after I filed for the injunction. The man's name was Foster. He was experienced and systematic, and he moved quickly. He filed a responding affidavit claiming the transfer was a genuine interfamily gift, made in full knowledge and voluntarily. He argued I had business experience and legal literacy, and could not credibly claim confusion about documents I signed. He was not wrong that I could read a document. He was wrong that I had been shown one. Catherine flagged a secondary concern. My son had also filed a complaint with the BC Seniors Advocate Office, claiming I was showing signs of cognitive decline and questioning whether I had capacity to manage my own affairs. It was a flanking move. If he could establish that I lacked capacity, the question of whether I understood what I signed became murkier. And if the court ever questioned my fitness to make legal decisions, his path to controlling the property got easier. I went for the cognitive assessment voluntarily before the court could order one. Dr. Renata Figueredo at the Victoria Geriatric Assessment Clinic ran a full battery over 2 sessions. She asked me to recall a list of words after a 20-minute interval. I recalled all 12. She asked me to walk her through a complex decision I had made in the past 5 years. I described the sale of my business in detail. She tested problem solving, pattern recognition, executive function, processing speed. Her report came back 2 weeks later. No evidence of cognitive impairment, full capacity across all measured domains. Decision-making ability, consistent with or above average for age cohort. My son's lawyer stopped referencing the capacity argument after that report was filed. What changed the shape of the case was the investigator Catherine brought in, a retired RCMP financial crimes officer named Robert, now working private, who spent 3 weeks pulling threads. He found them everywhere. My son carried just under $68,000 in unsecured debt across 4 credit products. 2 credit cards were in collections. 1 line of credit carried a notice of default. He and his wife had been making minimum payments for 14 months and had fallen behind on those. 6 months before the trip to Costa Rica, a creditor had filed a claim in BC Small Claims Court. Robert found something else: real estate inquiry emails. My son had contacted 3 separate agents asking for current market valuations on a property in Victoria. He had described my house, listed its square footage and lot size accurately, mentioned the suite below. One agent had responded with a figure of $1.1 million. Another had said $1.08. The third had offered to do a full comparative market analysis in person. These emails were sent 2 months before my son sat down with his laptop and asked me to sign what he called a healthcare directive. Robert found the search history on my son's home computer, which had backed up to a shared cloud account he had forgotten I still had access credentials for. A series of searches from January and February. How to transfer property title in BC. Difference between deed of gift and title transfer. Can a family property transfer be challenged? What constitutes abandonment of an elderly parent? That last search was dated February the 9th, 7 weeks before he left me in Liberia. Catherine read through Robert's report in silence, and then looked at me across her desk and said, "This case is not 60-40 anymore." The preliminary hearing before Justice Bellamy at BC Supreme Court lasted a full morning. My son sat at the respondent's table in a gray suit he had owned since his wedding. He did not look at me. His wife sat in the gallery behind him and watched the proceedings with the focused attention of someone calculating odds. Justice Bellamy was in her mid-50s, precise in her questions, and openly skeptical of generalities. She asked Foster twice to give her specific evidence that I had been informed the document was a title transfer rather than a medical directive. Foster said the document itself was clear on its face, and that any reasonable person would have read it before signing. Catherine presented the notary's statement, described the food court setting, the cash payment that was 10 times standard rate, the minimal time allowed for review, my son's stated reason of my supposed limited mobility, which my medical records confirmed was entirely false. Justice Bellamy asked Foster about the mobility claim. Foster said he would need to confirm that with his client. She asked him to do so quickly because she was not inclined to move forward without an explanation for it. 3 days after the preliminary hearing, Foster contacted Catherine with a settlement offer. My son would relinquish the title transfer voluntarily and sign a quitclaim deed returning the property to my name. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue civil damages and would allow him and his wife 60 days to vacate the suite. I told Catherine the answer was no. He would sign the quitclaim deed and they would vacate within 30 days. I would not agree to any release of civil liability. If he wanted to fight the damages claim, he was welcome to fight it. Foster came back the next day. 30 days. No liability release. Catherine said my son had agreed. 2 weeks later, I sat in Catherine's office and watched my son's signature appear at the bottom of the quitclaim deed. He signed in blue pen quickly, without looking up. His wife was not there. Catherine's assistant witnessed, and the document was filed with the land title office by 4 that afternoon. The RCMP file moved more slowly, as these things do. The assistant Crown prosecutor, a young man named Sullivan who called me 3 times over the course of the autumn, told me the evidence supported charges of fraud over $5,000 and theft over $5,000. He said the strongest path forward was a negotiated resolution. My son would plead guilty to a single count of fraud. He would receive a conditional sentence, which in this case meant house arrest and community service for 12 months, followed by 3 years of probation. A permanent criminal record. No incarceration given no prior history. I asked Sullivan what justice looked like to him in this situation. He was quiet for a moment and then said that in his experience, a conviction that follows someone permanently often did more lasting work than a sentence that ended. I said, "If the Crown is satisfied with that resolution, so am I." My son and his wife were gone from the suite within the 30 days. Patricia watched them load the van from her porch. She told me afterward that my son had carried boxes alone while his wife sat in the passenger seat with her phone. That he had looked diminished, she said. That was the word she used. Not angry, not defiant, just smaller than he used to be. I stood in the suite after they left and looked at the space. They had not taken anything that belonged to me this time. They had left 2 mugs in the cupboard and a handmade calendar on the refrigerator door from the previous year. I took the calendar down and put it in the recycling bin and washed the mugs and put them on the shelf. My father's Hamilton pocket watch was recovered from a storage locker in Saanich along with my wife's silver tea service and the Emily Carr print. The RCMP property unit returned them to me in a plastic evidence bin. The watch had been wound at some point and was still running. I set it to the right time and put it back in its place on the shelf in my office and stood there for a while looking at it. Catherine sent the final account in November. $41,260. She noted she had not billed for 4 hours of associate research time. I wrote the check and included a note. She sent back a short reply saying it had been a privilege and that she hoped I got to enjoy the house in peace. I met with an estate lawyer named Gerald the following month. I wanted the title protected going forward. Gerald drew up a new will. My son is explicitly disinherited. When I'm gone, the property goes to the Cridge Center for the Family in Victoria to support housing for older adults. Gerald asked if I was certain. I said I had never been more certain of anything. The lawsuit on my son's credit card debt resolved itself. One of the creditors obtained a judgment in January. The conditional sentence was entered on his record in February. I have not spoken to him since the afternoon he signed the quitclaim deed. I have no plans to change that. In March, I hired someone to refinish the hardwood floors in the suite and repaint the walls a color my wife had always liked, a soft slate blue. I listed it with a property manager who found tenants, a retired couple from Prince Edward Island who wanted to downsize and liked the neighborhood. They paid first and last, as required by the Residential Tenancy Act, and moved in on the 1st of April. They leave a Christmas card from Nova Scotia on my door at the holidays, and we nod at each other over the fence in the evenings. It is exactly the right arrangement. Patricia and I have coffee on Saturday mornings now. She asks about the garden, and I ask about her grandchildren, and we do not talk about what happened unless she brings it up, which she does sometimes, usually when something in the news reminds her. Last week she said, "Do you ever wish it had gone differently?" I thought about that. Thought about my son in that gray suit not looking at me. Thought about the storage locker and the evidence bin, and the pocket watch still running after everything. I said, I wish it had never happened. But once it did, I'm glad I didn't let it stand. She said she thought that was the only honest answer. I walked home in the early evening, unlocked my front door with my key, the key that only I hold, and stood in the hallway where the Emily Carr print hangs again in its place. The house was quiet and warm and completely mine. I made dinner, watched the Canucks lose in overtime, washed the dishes and went to bed. Some things cannot be restored to exactly what they were. A son is not a contractor you can replace, and a trust broken by someone you raised carries a weight that legal victories do not fully lift. I know that. I understand the distinction between winning and being whole. But I am still here, still in this house, still the one who holds the key. That is enough. Some days it is more than enough. If this story meant something to you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I would love to know where you are watching from. For the next story, click on the box on the screen. Thank you for your time.